الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على خاتم الأنبياء أشرف المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. طيب, so I know I said the last dars was going to be the funnest dars, but this one actually might end up being funner. We're going to really just discuss two masail today, but there are two hotly contested masail where there is a lot of discussion, so they're really fun masail. طيب, so where were we? In the dars, in the matan, we were at the point in the sifatul salah, in the description of the salah, when you had risen up from ruku', and we talked about the adhkar, Sami Allah liman hamida, and then Rabbana wa lakal hamd, and then adding to it, Rabbana lakal hamd, hamdan kathiran tayyiban mubarakan fi, or Allahumma Rabbana wa lakal hamd, and so on. What we stopped at is, what do you do with your hands? After ruku', when you get up after ruku', do you fold your hands back, or do you put them by your sides? And this is a mas'ala where you really shouldn't divide the ummah on. Like, there's not one of those things where you're gonna, like, you know, either you are a person of bid'ah or a person of sunnah if you do one or the other. La. Because there is no sarih, no explicit hadith that discusses where to place the hands after ruku'. Tayyib? So there is no hadith that explicitly talks about that بعد الركوع, after ruku', Rasulullah did this with his hands or that. Tayyib. So the muallif of the matan doesn't mention this mas'ala, but the sharih, the one who did the sharh, Rawt al-Murbi' that we're using, of al-Biyuti, he discusses this issue and he says, إِذَا رَفَعَ الْمُصَلِّي مِنَ الرُّكُوعِ, if the musalli, the one praying, gets up from ruku', فَإِنْ شَاءَ, if he likes, وَدَعَ يَمِينَهُ عَلَى شِمَالِهِ, his right on his left, أو أرسلهما, or he puts them down. He gives ikhtiyar, and he gives this option, you can do either one. And this is the mu'tamad, this is the relied upon muftahbi of the madhab of the Hanabila, that you have that choice. And there is nas, there is a clear statement from Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. He was asked, what should we do? He said, if you like, fold them back, if you like, put them down. Why? The usul of the Hanabila is to be strict on adillah. And when you don't have a sarih, like an explicit dalil, then Imam Ahmad would give the choice, because he couldn't say you have to do one way or the other, because what if the dalil isn't there to explicitly make that type of a statement. Having said that, we get a lot of durus where the muallif will just, the author will just say, do either one. Tayyib, but which one is closer to the sunnah? Everybody needs to do one or the other, right? You can't only put one hand down, one up, or something like this, right? So in this issue, we're going to discuss some adillah today. And there is an extreme. Some of the people, one of the great shuyukh of our time, may Allah reward him for all the good that he did, but he made a statement. He said, to make wada', to put the hands back, this is a bid'ah. And he called it a Hijazi bid'ah. The people of Hijaz came up with this bid'ah. And some of the people, some of his students, they said this wasn't even discussed except 100 years ago, and so on. These are all mistakes. First thing, this issue was asked of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal. So it's not like Imam Ahmad wasn't from Hijaz, he wasn't from Najd, he wasn't from Jazira al-Arabi, he was from Iraq. That's where he used to teach. And there, this was not 100 years ago, and he was explicitly asked, do you put your hands back or down? So even at that time, this was going on, and he gave that option. And many classic a'imma and ulama took the view that you put them down, and many classic a'imma and ulama took the view that you put them back. So both have been discussed. Neither one can be called a bid'ah. Neither one of them can be said only 100 years ago. This is a mistake. Tayyib. But which one is stronger? So the ulama that said that you put your hands back down by the side do not have any explicit dalil for this. There is no hadith that says that Rasulullah put his hands on the sides after ruku'. There is a hadith which mentions that Rasulullah used to make irsal to go into ruku', meaning that irsal, to let go of the hands to go into ruku', has been mentioned, but it does not mention what happens after ruku'. Tayyib. There is a hadith that mentions sadal. Sadal means to put your hands down, but that is a nahi. That is in the Sunan of Abu Dawud. There is some kalam on the son of the hadith, there is some weakness in it, but that is to forbid putting your hands by the sides. So to explicitly prove putting the hands on the side, there is no hadith. So why do those ai like even Imam al-Nawawi from the classic ulama and Sheikh Albani from our recent ulama, take the view, and other ai throughout history, including from within every madhab, have discussed this issue. So why do they take this view of putting the hands by the side after ruku'? They said because there is no explicit dalil to put the hands back. And if there is no explicit dalil, then what is the regular place for hands? It's by the sides. So they said then putting them by the side, sadlan, to make sadl, is not something to do. It's not doing anything. Right? So when you don't have a hadith for doing, then you go to the regular way, which in regular life when you're walking around, what do? You have your hands by your side. That's not doing something. Tayyib. So this is their dalil. And there are some other adillah they use. For example, they said that Rasulullah used to be calm and it's more calm to put the hand by the side. But then this is not a dalil because the same calmness is mentioned for sujood. It doesn't mean you flop your hands down, right? The being calm is something different from folding or not folding. Those ulama that take the view for folding to be closer to the sunnah, being the better way, and some of them very classic, including some very classic Hanafi ulama, even though we don't see this amongst Ahnaf, but if you look at Fath al-Qadir of Ibn Hammam, they will mention some very classic ulama. I am writing a book that is comprehensive about folding in Salah. I haven't finished it. Raf'ul Yadayn I finished. I'm writing a book called Hadi alayhi salatu wassalam fi wad'a al-yumna ala al-yusra fi al-qiyam, which is not going to be after ruku', but it's going to discuss this issue. And in that book, inshallah, when I get some time and tawfiq from Allah, I will give all of the references to the different ulama that took the different views. So I'm not going to go deep into that here, but from every madhab you will find some ai that mention this, including Ibn Hazm. In Muhalla he takes this view of folding the hands after ruku'. In the Hanabala Ri'aya has been mentioned, this famous book. In it he mentions folding the hands after ruku' to be sunnah and so on. So there are ai early on and stuff that took both views. But what are the evidences? I mentioned the evidences for irsal. What about the evidences for folding? Our shuyukh from our time, the majority of those ai that are strict on adillah, and especially from the Hanabala, they took to make wada', including Shaykh Abdul Aziz ibn Baz. He said to put the hands back, including Shaykh Muhammad Salih ibn Uthaymeen in his Fatawa Arkan al-Islam, in his Sharh al-Mumti', in his Majmu' al-Fatawa, in all of them he supported this, including Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, including Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd, including Shaykh Ibn Jibreen and other ai and ulama. They took this view to put the hands back. Tayyib. Shaykh Albani on the other hand took the view to put the hands on the side. Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen and other ai they mention the first dalil is from Sahih al-Bukhari. And this is the hadith of Salih ibn Sa'ad radiyallahu anhu, famous hadith, kan an-nas yu'maruna, there were people who were ordered an yada'a, to fold, a person should, al-yad al-yumna, he takes his right hand, ala dira'ihi, upon his forearm, al-yusra fi salah. So what is very important about this hadith is Salih ibn Sa'ad radiyallahu anhu says that during the time of Rasulullah we were ordered, and as Abu Hazim, one of the narrators, says that this was Rasulullah that instructed them to do this, to fold the right hand on the forearm of the left hand. But what did he say? Fi salah. Now this is very important. What does fi salah mean? In the prayer. It did not say fil qiyam or fi qiyam al-ula, at the first qiyam or just while standing. Tayyib. So then the question would be that do you fold the hands throughout the salah? La. Why? Because this is am. This is general. It just says fi salah. But in ruku', do we have a khas? Do we have a particular hadith that mentions where to put the hands in ruku'? Yes, we discussed it already. So you will always take the khas on the am. This is usul al-fiqh. You will take the particular specific over the general. Tayyib, in sujood, do we have a hadith where to put the hands? Yes. In tashahhud, do we have a place, hadith that mentions? Yes. So in all those situations, you will put the hands, for example, in ruku' on your knees, in sujood, and level with your shoulders, right? In tashahhud on your thighs, right? Because there are particular ahadith. Now, when you don't have a khas hadith, what will you do then? Go to the am, right? So when you don't have a hadith, where Rasulullah ﷺ put his hands. Now to say that to put the hands on the sides is the natural position, but that's outside of salah. Naturally outside of salah you can talk, you can eat. Regularly when you're walking around, you look around, you're like, hey, how's it going, bro? You turn away from the qibla, no problem. But in salah you cannot, because the aam of salah is different from the aam of kharij of salah. طيب? So what is the aam in salah? This hadith in al-Bukhari sets it, is to put the right hand on the left. So when you don't have a sarih dalil, when you don't have a clear dalil, you have to go to the aam. But there are many other adillah. There is a very, very important, for those that are tullab ilm, there's a book, it's called Ziyadatul Khushu' بوضع اليدين في القيام بعد الركوع. It means increasing the khushu' by folding the hands in the standing after ruku'. And this entire book is written about this one mas'ala. One of the great scholars of hadith, Allama Shaykh Zamanihi, the Shaykh of his time, Badiuddin Sindhi. He was one of the scholars of hadith. He wrote this entire book. I have it. It's an amazing book. You can get it online for free. I highly suggest you get it. It's called Ziyadatul Khushu' بوضع اليدين في القيام بعد الركوع. Right? So this entire book was written, and this is the best work I found on this. And other ai like Shaykh ibn Baz also wrote a risala supporting the view of folding the hands. He wrote a risala, but this one by Shaykh Badiuddin Sindhi is way above that. Shaykh ibn Baz is a very short risala. This is a very comprehensive book, and he gives the names of ai and ulama of the past that took this view in an adillah. I'm not going to get into all of this. I'm going to mention one or two more ahadith. I'm going to mention two more ahadith. I could mention a bunch because I'm writing a book on this. I have this all prepped up, but I'm going to mention just two. The next one I'm going to mention is the jayyid, the qawi, a strong hadith from the musnad of Imam Ahmad. In the musnad Imam Ahmad, it's hadith number 18,871. I might be mistaken, I'm just going off memory here. 18,871 in the musnad Imam Ahmad. And in it, Wail ibn Hujr radiallahu anhu, he's a Sahabi, and it's very important because Wail ibn Hujr became Muslim close to the end of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So his ahadith are usually the end of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So you can't say this is nasikh or mansukh or so on. He mentioned that Rasulullah, he describes the salah by making raf' al-yadayn, going into ruku', raf' al-yadayn and so on. But then he says, حين قال, when he said, Sami Allah liman hamida, yani when he said this, he made raf' al-yadayn. And so this is talking about getting up from ruku'. And after that, he says, وَرَأَيْتُ, and then I saw مُمَسِّكًا holding يَمْنَاهُ عَلَى شِمَالِهِ. And no, very important here. What's important here? And then he says fi salah as well. But what's important, he talks about ruku'. And after that, now he doesn't explicitly say ba'd al-ruku'. But if you look at the order that he mentions it in, he mentions the recitation and then going into ruku', and then he says, when he said Sami Allahu liman hamida, he did raf' al-yadayn, and after mentioning him standing up, then he says, and I saw him holding the left hand with the right hand, and he folding these hands fi salah, in the salah. So now this even mentions it at the point after ruku'. But I said there's no explicit hadith, right? Why? Because he doesn't say فَعَلَ ذَلِكَ بَعْدَ الرُّكُوع. He didn't explicitly say, but the order was mentioned after ruku'. Tayyib. And there are a lot of adillah for this, but I will mention one more here, as Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah and others have discussed this as well. Tayyib. This is a riwayah that's in al-Bukhari from Anas ibn Malik radiyallahu anhu. He says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he used to make raf'a ra'suhu min al-ruku'. He used to get up from ruku', and then he qama, and then he would stand. Hatta naqul nasiya. He used to get up from ruku', and then he used to stand so long that we used to think that he forgot. Now, why is that? This is a Bukhari hadith, no doubt to its authenticity. Why is that important? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he's making salah, he's standing in salah, right? And then he goes into ruku', and then he gets up from ruku', and he stands so long that the Sahaba looking at him that are standing behind him. Now we know the Sahaba, even though they used to look at the place of sujood, but standing behind the Imam, they used to look at the Imam sometimes, like Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when there was a reason. And we know that from the ahadith where they mentioned his beard moving when he was reciting, and they looked at him. From other ahadith where Abu Bakr went back and he went forward, they report. So that means they looked at him, and he was standing so long they thought he forgot, meaning that he thought he was in the standing before ruku'. Tayyib, how is that a very explicit dalil? Istidlalan. If he was doing something different, then when you look up and you saw his hands down, you would like, he hasn't forgotten, because he's standing in a way that is different from before ruku'. It had to be that the appearance was the same as it was before ruku'. For them, radiallahu anhum, to see him and not be able to tell whether he realizes that he's in the standing after ruku' or the standing before ruku'. This is a very explicit hadith, but you have to kind of think about it, istidlalan, right? Tayyib, so these three adillah that I've mentioned, and there's a lot. I have 26 hadith that I have put together myself on this issue, and other people with better, that prove that the better way, what is afdal, what is better, as Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen and Shaykh Ibn Baz and other Imam and ulama have taken, is to, and Shaykh Abdullah al-Fawzan as well, Shaykh Khalil al-Fawzan and also Shaykh Abdullah al-Fawzan, is that to put the hands back after ruku' is aqrab, it is closer to the way of the person of salah. And this is the way of khushu'. Why do you fold your hands in salah to begin with? Because you stand adaban with proper etiquettes in front of Allah. So why do you not want to have that etiquette getting up from ruku'? And this is not just a position where you quickly move. Look at this hadith in al-Bukhari. Rasulullah stood so long, they thought it was like the first standing, that's how long, and the adhkar are many. And one of the usul of the Hanafi madhab, Ahnaf, as Ibn Hammam has mentioned in Fath al-Qadir, that from earlier Hanafi ulama, that any time that you have a masnoon dhikr, you have to fold the hands. And that's why the Hanafis, even during qunut, they fold the hands. But then here, after ruku', don't you have a masnoon dhikr? Of course. ربنا ولك الحمد is masnoon. ربنا ولك الحمد كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه ملء السماوات وملء الأرض. So many adhkar that are masnoon, long adhkar, right? So they should follow the usul here, and that's why many of the Hanafi ulama originally did. They had the opinion that you fold the hands back, even though today we don't see them following their own usul. Tayyib. So this was the first fun issue, but there's one more. That's how fun this is, right? The second fun issue that we have is, then he says thumma, then the person, he goes down mukabbiran, making takbir this is in the matan, in Zadul Mustaqni'. In the sharh of it, in the explanation of it, Al-Buyuti says, وَلَا يَرْفَعْ يَدَيْهِ, and he does not make raf al-yadayn. So we were standing back up, we made the adhkar, we mentioned what is aqrab, what is closer to the sunnah is to fold the hands back, not to leave them by the side. Because there is no dalil for leaving on the side, but there are ahadith and adillah for folding. Tayyib, so you fold the hands back. Now you're going into sujood. Do you make raf al-yadayn again? La. Why not? Because the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma in al-Bukhari and Muslim and so on, he says, أنه يعني صلى الله عليه وسلم, he صلى الله عليه وسلم كان لا يرفع في كل, يعني he did not make that, لا يفعل ذلك, he did not do that في sujood. In anything to do with sujood, there was no rafa. Not going into sujood, not getting up from sujood and sitting, not going back into sujood, there is no rafa there. Not getting up from sujood for the second rak'ah, there is no rafa there. طيب? And the hadith is in al-Bukhari, the hadith of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma. Now, there are some ai that said every time you go up and down you make raf al-yadayn. There are some ulama, and they have a hadith where it mentions إنه كان يرفع في كل خفض ورفع, that he sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to make raf al-yadayn in every going up and down. But as Ibn al-Qayyim has pointed out, that this is a mistake in the matan, not in the sanad. They're like the sanad of sahih, we know. But in the matan, the stronger wording is kana yukabbir. He used to make takbir, not raf al-yadayn. Because raf al-yadayn, it clearly shows from Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu that he did not do it. And another riwayah that mentions about making rafa with every takbir, this is, as Ibn Uthaymeen rahmatullah alayhi had mentioned, this is for janaza. In janaza or idain, you make rafa with every takbir, but not in the salah, because the hadith of Ibn Umar is explicit. So when do you make rafa al-yadayn? When you start the salah, when you're going into ruku', and when you're getting up from ruku'. When you're going into sujood, you do not make rafa al-yadayn. When you're getting up to sit between the two sajdas, you do not make Raf'ul Yadayn. When you're getting up for your second rak'ah, you do not make Raf'ul Yadayn. Regarding the getting up for the third rak'ah, we'll discuss that when we get there. Tayyib. Now, that was not the fun mas'ala. That was the easy mas'ala. The fun mas'ala gets to be is, do you go into sujood hands first or knees first? Tayyib. So here you have some khilaf of ulama. The muallif here in the matan and in the sharh. And what is the mu'tamad, relied upon opinion of the Hanabila, is you go knees first. And this is the opinion of the Jamhur of the ulama of Islam, including the Hanafi ulama, the madhab of Hanafiya, mu'tamadan, include their mu'tamad opinion is knees first. And the Shafi'i madhab is knees first. And the Hanbali madhab is the knees first. Tayyib. Amongst our current, not current, they passed away most of them, but recent ulama, we have a Shaykh Abdulaziz ibn Baz, rahmatullah alayh. We have a Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen, a Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan, Shaykh Abdullah al-Fawzan. They all, Shaykh ibn Jibreen, Shaykh Bakr Abu Zayd, they also took knees first. From the earlier Imma who were well known, like Ibn al-Qayyim and Ibn Taymiyyah, they also took knees first. But all of them said, neither way will invalidate your salah. If you go hands first or knees first, it's not something to fight about. It's not something that invalidates. Both are allowed because they have adillah, but they preferred going knees first. From the madhab, the only madhab from the major four madhahib that said hands first is the Maliki madhab. Imam Malik and the Maliki madhab, majority of them, even though some of them disagreed, they said hands first. And there are some imma and ulama from other madhahib that agreed with this. In the Zahiri madhab, you have both opinions as well. And Awza'i, there's one of the, or the closer to his opinion, it seems like, was also hands first. Tayyib. But we always have to go back to adillah, the proofs. When we look at the proofs, there are two major evidences that are used for those that said hands first, right? Which is Imam Malik, and from our ulama that are closer to our generation, Shaykh Albani took this view, hands first, okay, instead of knees first. The hadith that they're relying upon is the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and even though it is mu'allaqan, but it is not a part of Bukhari itself, right? It's used mu'allaqan, and sanadan, it is very strong. The chain is strong. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, as the riwayah from Ibn Abi Shayba, he says that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, if one of you goes into sujood, do not go the way that a camel does, right? But put your hands before your knees. This is the narration of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. Now, the sanad of this is sahih, no doubt to it. They also mention the riwayah of Ibn Umar radiallahu anhuma, Abdullah, the son of Umar ibn Khattab, Abdullah ibn Umar, that he used to go hands before the knees. And it's also a reliable narration. There is discussion on the sanad and kalam, but it's a reliable narration. The A'imma and ulama, and the Jamhur of the ulama, the majority of them, including Shaykh ibn Uthaymeen and those great A'imma of our time, that took the other view, they based it off a few different narrations. One of them is that of Wa'il ibn Hujr. And remember Wa'il ibn Hujr, why was he important? I mentioned it earlier, because he became Muslim at the end of the life of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when you look at Nasikh and Mansukh, anything that Malik ibn Huwayrath or these kinds of Sahaba mention, whatever they mention is given precedence because they could not have seen Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam at early times. Tayyib. So Wa'il ibn Hujr radiallahu anhu reports a hadith that when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to make sajda, إذا sajada, yani he used to wada'a, he used to use his rukbatay, he used to go down with his knees qabla yaday, before his hands. Alaikum assalam. Tayyib. So now what is the difference here? First thing is this is the fi'l of Nabi alayhi salatu, this is the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, while the other is qawl. And usually qawl is actually given precedence. This hadith Imam al-Bayhaqi and Imam al-Darqutni and Shaykhuna al-Albani, they weakened it. They said it's a da'if hadith. But Imam al-Tirmidhi considered it reliable, but he's mutasahil as we know. But al-Tahawi and al-Baghawi and Ibn al-Qayyim and Zad al-Ma'ad also authenticate this hadith. They said the hadith is authentic. But there is khilaf on this. I've done a lot of research on this hadith and these ahadith, and I can tell you that sanadan, this hadith is weaker than the other hadith. Hadith of Wa'il ibn Hujr, even though I consider it to be reliable, as Ibn al-Qayyim has shown, because of shawahid. Say it. But if you just took asanid, this would be weaker than the hadith of Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu about going hands first. But there are shawahid. There is the hadith of Anas that Imam al-Hakim has considered to be sahih. Al-Dhahabi was sakit on it, but there are some who have criticized that hadith as well because of two weak narrators. There is khilaf on it. And what we do know sahih sanadan as Ibn Abi Shayba, and this morning I looked at all these up again, just I like to revise and check again when I teach these type of masail. The Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, the great sahabi from the Khulafa, Umar ibn Khattab, there is a clear, sarih, sahih hadith that he used to go knees first. And this hadith has many more asanid, chains, even though some of them are criticized, but they mention the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for going knees first. Tayyib. So what about the earlier narration of Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu? Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah, if you're interested in this mas'ala, you have to look at what Ibn al-Qayyim mentions in Zad al-Ma'ad. His book Zad al-Ma'ad, he mentions 10 evidences to show that going down hands first is incorrect. Tayyib. How? He says the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, the first of it contradicts the end of it. Tayyib. How? When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us, do not go into sujood like the camel. How does the camel go? Sit down. I mean, he doesn't go into sujood. How does he sit? Tayyib. He puts his front legs down first. Tayyib. Now, those imma, like a Shaykh Albani, I have his Sifatul Salah, the big one, not the small one that everybody has, 3-volume one. He responds to this. He says, well, even the camel's front legs are also his legs. And those, what we would call elbows, are also called knees. Okay? The front legs, that is true. But Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen in Sharh al-Mumti, he responds to that response. And he says, yes, but the camel only has 4 legs. He doesn't have arms. Right? Does the camel have arms? No, it has 4 legs, right? So if you say the front legs also have knees and the back legs also have knees. So when you make in the Lugha al-Arabiya, in the Arabic language, tashbih, when you give an example with the animal, then you have to give tashbihan to the human. Meaning when Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, don't sit in sujood like the dog, but the arms. Well, he wasn't talking about our legs, right? Even though you can say, well, a dog doesn't have arms, he only has 4 legs, right? But why is the tashbih of the front paws with our front legs? Right? When Rasulullah said, don't look around like a fox. Well, it doesn't mean like you're going to change your eyes or something. They're like, no, it is the action. Or peck like a hen. Right? Meaning you don't make sujood like that. Right? You cannot say, well, the hen doesn't really put her forehead on the ground. Well, no, it's the action, right? So when you go up to a dog, I mean, I know in other countries they don't have, but in America we have this example we can use, right? And you say, shake hands. Do you go for the back leg or the front paw? I'm trying to explain how language works, right? Which one do you go for? Front. You never go to a dog and say, shake hands and go to the back paw. And they're like, what are you doing? Well, they're all legs, right? You make tashbih of the front legs with the hands, right? So Shaykh Ibn Uthaymeen says that if you say that this hadith is as the matan shows it, then you are saying the tashbih is batil. That this is a linguistic mistake. And we know that Rasulullah didn't make linguistic mistakes. So then, as a detective, these great ulama, they, as Ibn al-Qayyim in Zad al-Ma'ad says, we start looking at the different chains. And some of the chains of the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu has the words flipped. Even though sanadan they're weaker, but matan has to be looked at as well. People forget, this is the people, oh, Shaykh Albani said it's da'if. Calm down, take a deep breath, count to 10. Understand something, we don't just look at asanid. In Mustalah al-Hadith, we look at the matan as well. Here you clearly have an iqlab. You clearly have, Ibn al-Qayyim says, there is a word that has been flipped. How? Because in other chains, even if the chain is weaker, but matanan, it shows the same wording coming from the same chain in the further up from the chain, from Abu Huraira radiallahu anhu, from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, saying that you do not go down like the camel, but put your knees first. So Ibn al-Qayyim says that means that this sanad came, and somewhere in the authentic, as far as their adl and stuff chain, somebody flipped a wording. Tayyib. But he gives another evidence. And this is a very, very strong evidence. He says, if you look at all the ahadith that mention fi'lan, the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, not a single one mentions that somebody saw Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam fi'lan, by action, putting his hands before his knees. All the ahadith that mention the fi'l of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mention knees. So that fi'l then makes tashrih of the qawl. I spent a lot of time on this issue, as you can probably tell. Understand? Because tayyib, when we look at the qawl of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam that do not go down like the camel, and now we have different asanid giving us one saying it means knees first, one saying hands first, and it seems to contradict that part. Then we have to go look at the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. How did he do it? And all the ahadith on the action of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mention knees first. So then the fi'l, the action, makes tashrih, explains the qawl, the saying. Ibn al-Qayyim mentions another dalil, and this is the one that sealed the case for me personally, right? Which is a hadith that has some da'f in it, has some weakness in the sanad, even though Ibn Khuzaymah considered it to be sahih. But that's not the point. The hadith is of Sa'd radiallahu anhu. It says, كنا ندعى اليدين قبل ركبتين فأمرنا بركبتين قبل يدين. He says, we used to put our hands before our knees, and then we were ordered, and obviously by who? Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to put our knees before our hands. Now, sanadan, this has some weakness, but what is the really important part of this hadith? That it shows that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam allowed this in the beginning of people going with the hands, but then he ordered them. Now, even though the hadith has some weakness, but the beauty of it here is that it comes back into those sahih narrations and those to explain that what was the order of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is explicit that they used to put their hands, and then Rasulullah instructed them to put the knees. So it strengthens those asanid from Abu Hurairah that mention knees first. So looking at all of this, no doubt what is correct is that you put your knees first, then your hands. And this is the only thing proven fi'lan from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And if you take the ilal in the matan of the hadith of Abu Hurairah, then no doubt, as Al-Khattabi and others have mentioned, the hadith of Wail ibn Hujr is stronger, because the ilal in the matan. So if we look at all these adillah together in depth, and please, if you are interested, read what Ibn al-Qayyim says, Zad al-Ma'ad, it's amazing. Then this is the opinion. But what about the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar? Tayyib, Ibn al-Qayyim answers that as well. He says that his father was better than him, first thing. If you bring the hadith of Abdullah ibn Umar going hands first, then Umar ibn Khattab's sahih riwayah of going knees first is afdal. No doubt our ummah is come to a consensus that amongst the Sahaba, the Khulafa al-Arba'a were the best. Right? No doubt Umar ibn Khattab radiyanhu was one of the most knowledgeable of the Sahaba, in every which way greater than his son. Right? From being from the Khulafa, being a Muslim early, and so on, meaning even though Abdullah ibn Umar radiyanhu was very young, and he learned a lot, and he was a great Sahabi, but Umar ibn Khattab was one of the Khulafa. But that's not even the response I would give. What I would actually point out, and what I found in my research, is Abdullah ibn Umar, closer to his later age, he definitely started doing things differently due to physical pain. And there is a sarih, clear dalil, where he would sit with one foot over the other. And one of the tabi'un started to do that. Abdullah ibn Umar told him, don't do that, because the sunnah is to prop up the right foot and sit on the left. So he said, but I saw you do it. He said, I do it out of pain. And he had a physical hardship, getting older of age. So it is then explainable that he used to do the hands first due to physical pain. The other response can also be given, which is that he did it in the early time, but we know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam then ordered to put the knees first. But the hadith of Umar bin Khattab that he went the knees first, there is explicit, clear, sahih hadith. Tayyib. So, with these two really fun masail, we'll end the dars today. And inshallah, we'll continue with the sujood in the next dars. Jazakumullahu khairan.